Alright guys, welcome back to the channel. It's Maddie here, and today we're doing another tier list since it is Tuesday. However, we're not going to be doing a meta deck tier list. Last week we did our final, best decks tier list rankings for Spacetime Smackdown. So if you haven't seen that video, go check it out. I assume most of you have seen it. It's doing pretty well in terms of views. But today we're doing something a little bit different. Yes, in the next week or so, we should be getting the next mini set, the next expansion to Pokemon TCG Pocket. So today, I just wanted to do something a little bit different on Tier List Tuesday. We're going to be ranking and putting on the tier list all of the EX Pokemon in Pokemon TCG Pocket. I've wanted to do this for a while now. We have quite a few EX Pokemon in the game. I believe I have all of them right here. So we're going to go ahead, put them on the tier list and talk about them a little bit. One thing I want to note though in this video is we're not going to be talking about like how good they are in the current metagame. I'm really just talking about how good these cards are in general. Oftentimes cards that are really good don't see as much play because they don't necessarily have good matchups against other cards or I guess other decks in the format. And I think a big reason why some of these cards maybe will be ranked higher than others is also just based off the level of sort of support, that they have in the current game right now and in the current format. For example, something like Gyarados EX is a very strong card, but it has, we have Misties, we have Vaporeon, we've got Manaphy, Druddigon, Greninja. So like, there's a lot of reasons why Gyarados sees a lot of play and that it's a good deck, but we're going to be ranking just the EX cards right now. So bear with me. And these are, of course, just going to be my opinions, but yeah, let's get right into it. But before we do that, guys, I just want to thank everybody for us hitting 10,000 subscribers. It's absolutely insane that we managed to hit 10,000 subscribers here on the channel. I really do appreciate it. The support has been incredible. So I just wanted to say thank you to all you guys. I really do appreciate it. And if you're not subscribed to the channel, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and stay tuned for all of the future videos that we will be doing here on the channel. So let's get right into it, guys. Right in order, I guess, well, in order of however they're placed here on this list. It looks like Charizard is number 1 here. So let's go ahead and rank Charizard. So I really do love Charizard EX. We have to pay our respects to Charizard. It's one of the few cards that has remained relevant since the beginning of the game, since, the game was released and we just had Genetic Apex. Charizard was one of the best decks and one of the strongest EX cards since then. It still is. Basically, the Crimson Storm attack doing 200 damage. There's nothing in the game that does as much damage or guaranteed damage as Charizard EX. Yes, we have things like Celebi, which can kind of scale above 200 depending on how many coin flips there are. But Charizard for 4 energies doing 200 damage is always relevant. It one-hit KOs every Pokemon in the game, at least up to this point. There's nothing in the game, not even like a Venusaur EX with Giant Cape, still gets one-hit KO'd by Charizard. So unless we see something change, Charizard EX should always have that potential. It does have a lot of support. Again, it's paired with Moltres, and it always has been since day one. I don't think there's ever going to be a Charizard deck that isn't paired with Moltres. They're just sort of meant to go together. But yeah, I do like Charizard. I don't think I'm going to put it in the S tier, if I'm being 100% honest with you. I do always speak really highly of Charizard because I do think it's a really good card, but it's slow, it's a little bit inconsistent, it relies on Moltres to get powered up. Sometimes, it is a stage 2 Pokemon, so not only do you have to power it up with Moltres to get all the energies onto it, but you also have to evolve it. Stage 2 Pokemon in the game right now are just a little bit less, I don't want to say less relevant, but they've been sort of nerfed a little bit since Cyrus came out. It's just sort of better to have Pokemon that are in the active spot and then stay there and provide value early on. Charizard is still, one of the most played decks in the format right now for good reason. It just can kind of beat anything at any moment in time. So I think Charizard has to go into the A tier. It could possibly go into the S tier, but I'm being a little bit biased. I just don't think Charizard in its own right as a card is an S tier card. That's just my honest opinion. Okay, so next up we have Arcanine EX. Arcanine did see some shine for a little while. Back in the Mythical Island format, Tempo Fire, this is really the only tempo-based fire attacker in the game right now. It's a stage 1 Pokemon, does 130 for 3 energies. You can pair this with Moltres. You don't even have to run it with Moltres, but Arcanine did see quite a bit of play in the last format in Mythical Island. It's not a bad card. I just think that right now in the format, it's not as fast as it needs to be, and there's just too much early damage that's kind of going out in the current format. Again, I'm not ranking this card based on how good it is in the metagame right now, but I am just sort of overall, calculating Arcanine based off of how good it's been since it was released. This was, a card that came out in Genetic Apex. It didn't see that much play. It really was kind of mostly an ancillary piece in Charizard decks before we had Pokemon communications, and we were just playing Pokemon as much as we possibly could in a lot of decks like Celebi and like Charizard and Moltres. So I do like Arcanine. I don't think it's really that good. I think this is a card that will probably get power crept. I don't know if we're ever going to, or in the recent times, if we're going to get another sort of, tempo-based fire type attacker. We'll have to see. This is really our only option right now, but fire types really are focused rather around, the late game. And there's just a lot of other better tempo decks or tempo cards in the format, and in the game right now in general. I think Arcanine EX is a good card, but I don't think it's great. We're going to put it in the B tier. I do expect Arcanine to get power crept as time goes on. That's just my opinion. But next up, we have Moltres EX. And this is a really interesting one because how do we really quantify Moltres? Because right now, it really only sees play when it's being paired with, of course, fire-type Pokemon, that being Charizard EX, Infernape, and sometimes Arcanine. It really is sort of the centerpiece of all of those fire-type decks. So you could, I guess, make the point that Moltres EX could be like an S-tier card, because really what it does is it makes all of these other fire-type cards much more viable. And I think that's something that we have to keep in mind. Just because a card isn't maybe, the star of the deck, but, it sees a lot of play, sees a lot of success, we kind of have to give Moltres some credit. It's a little bit more RNG based, but it is one of the original and really the only cards in the game that is able to basically accelerate energies or create energies out of basically thin air, and get your fire type Pokemon all set up. Now we have Manaphy and we do have Dialga, so there are some other cards that are able to do that, but it's one of the few cards that can do that. And I think that Moltres is definitely going to be, I don't really love putting it in the A tier. I think that Moltres is reliant on the cards in which we're able to pair with it, similarly to something like Dialga, but Moltres has been very relevant since day one. It's one of the centerpieces of all fire-type decks, at least in the first however many months since this game has been out. And unless we get, like I said, more of an aggro or tempo-based fire-type EX card, I think that Moltres is going to remain very, very relevant. So we're going to go ahead and put it in the A tier. I think that this is where Moltres belongs. Similarly to Charizard, I think it just has a strong attack, strong effect. It can set itself up or set up another Moltres on the bench. You can technically attack and do 70 damage for 3 energies, which is a pretty underwhelming attack, but really we're not judging Moltres on that attack. We're judging it on the first attack that accelerates energies. Again, basic Pokemon, 1 energy. We can do this on our first turn. We can really start filling up energies. I think Moltres will probably be relevant for a very long time. I think that the developers of Pokemon Pocket will probably have to keep Moltres in mind whenever they're creating fire-type cards or creating fire-type archetypes. For that reason, I do think that Moltres will probably stick around for quite some time. We're going to go ahead and put it in the A tier. Also, 140 HP on a basic EX Pokemon is nothing to scoff at. Definitely, I think A tier in my mind. I really do like Moltres, and I think it's pretty darn good. And next up, we have Blastoise. So Blastoise is a really, really interesting one. I know a lot of people, like basically every format, people kind of think to themselves like, hey, why not play Blastoise, right? It's not a bad card. Technically, it can one-hit KO Charizards. It does 160 if you have 5 energies onto it. It's very, very powerful. Unfortunately, though, it is a stage 2 Pokemon. Yes, we have things like Manaphy now to, I guess, more reliably get the energies on Blastoise, but the thing with Blastoise is that it's a little bit underwhelming until we're able to get those energies onto it, and there's not that much of a reliable option to get the energies onto Blastoise. And I think it really comes down to, like, why would we play Blastoise EX above really any of the other water-type Pokemon, which we'll see a lot of the other water-type EX Pokemon in Pokemon Pocket are exceptionally strong. Blastoise is a strong card, but it's like, why would we play Blastoise? Excuse me, when we could just play Gyarados, which for 4 energies does 140 on a stage 1 Pokemon. And yes, that's less than 160, but we can pair Gyarados with things like Druddigon with Greninja, and it really just ends up kind of being the same thing in terms of the results that Blastoise would be able to do. So, that's something to kind of keep in mind. And I think that stage 2 Pokemon are really going to struggle a little bit, at least on this tier list. And in the game so far, the only stage 2 Pokemon that have been, EX Pokemon, I should say, that have been really relevant have really only been Charizard, and the reason for that is because of the ability to one-hit KO basically anything in the game and being enabled by Moltres. So I do like Blastoise, but I just think that there's better water-type options, so we're going to go ahead and put it in the C tier. I think it's all relative. I don't think that Blastoise is necessarily a bad card, but it really hasn't done anything since the game was released, and like I said, they've released so many strong water-type EX Pokemon, we have to have some type of perspective when we're ranking Blastoise EX, so it's going to go into the B tier. And then next up, we have Articuno EX, which really was sort of the star of the show in terms of water-type Pokemon from Genetic Apex, the original sort of water EX Pokemon, along with Starmie EX. But instead of Moltres, this is also a basic EX Pokemon, 140 HP. Retreat cost of 2. It's got 2 attacks. The first one not very strong, Ice Wing. It does 40 damage for 2 energies. Not anything super substantial, but we all know about the Blizzard attack on Articuno EX. 80 damage for 3 water energies on a basic Pokemon. Now we all understand that Misty's is a card, and we have to keep that in mind when we're kind of factoring in and calculating how good these water type EX Pokemon are. Articuno's been relevant since day 1 to some degree. You always have the potential to flip heads on Misty's on turn 1, attack for Blizzard turn 1. It's really, really good. It's also doing 10 damage to the bench. That was kind of an ancillary effect initially in the first couple formats. It wasn't that big of a deal, but now with Cyrus out, it actually really does buff Blizzard pretty significantly. It makes it so our opponent is no longer able to retreat out, and we can kind of bring them back in with Cyrus. So I think that Cyrus has actually buffed Articuno pretty significantly, and I really do like Articuno, so I'm actually going to put it in the A tier. I think it's very relevant. It's really the only basic water-type Pokemon. Well, we have Palkia now, but I think that it's still an A tier card in its own right. I think it's really, really, really good, and it does see a lot of play, honestly. I mean, this format, it was tough for Articuno and other water decks because of Magnezone, but if Magnezone didn't exist, I think we would have seen that the water-type archetypes would have dominated this format, and I think that Articuno is still a very, very good card. I think a lot of people just choose not to play it because they don't like that RNG factor of Misty's and Blizzard in the early game, but I do think that it really does deserve to go into the A tier, similarly to Moltres. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to put Articuno in the A tier. And next up, we have Pikachu. So this is interesting. Like, in the previous format, I would have put Pikachu in the S tier because it was just so good. The problem with Pikachu, at least in the format right now, is that we have Pachirisu EX. And the way that we build decks basically with Pikachu was that we had to pair it with a lot of other electric-type Pokemon so that we could get the full damage from the Circle Circuit attack. So it was always one of the most consistent tempo cards in the game. In fact, it was really the original tempo deck, but with the release of Pachirisu EX and the release of Magnezone, the electric typing really was shaped very differently in how people were playing electric types in their deck. Now we have Magnezone, we can splash it with Darkrai, with Skarmory, with the fighting package, a lot of different ways. Pikachu really fell out of favor for a number of reasons, but I think primarily it just became more consistent to run less Pokemon in your deck, and Pikachu relies on running a lot of Pokemon in your deck, so people just kind of swapped to Pachirisu in favor of Pikachu. It does a little bit less damage, but it's just it's actually a lot easier to set up. Pachirisu can run 4 or 5 tool cards in the deck. You can only run, and Pachirisu decks are literally just running 2 Pachirisu to maximize the potential of getting that Pachirisu set up as early as possible, and that's something that Pikachu can't necessarily do that well in the format. So I think that the game has shifted really away from Pikachu. I don't think that it's a bad card. I think that people just are choosing to play Pachirisu EX, but I do think that Pikachu is actually a little bit disrespected, I think, still in the format. I just think that people aren't necessarily playing it as much as they maybe should or maybe could. So for that reason, I think Pikachu is going to go into the B tier. Again, this is a modern. We're not talking about like the history of these cards and how good they've been over the last 4 or 5 months, 3-4 months. I'm talking about how good they are like right now in the game. And again, I don't think Pikachu is that bad. I just think that it's kind of slept on, and there's better electric type Pokemon to be playing right now in the format. Pikachu is going to go into the B tier. Just really hasn't seen any play this format. And then next up is Starmie. Starmie is also a really, really interesting one. It's always been like fringe meta. I always love Starmie. 90 damage on your second or third turn. Very consistent. We do have Misty's to get this thing set up possibly on your first turn or second turn, and that could be really, really good. Yeah, not first turn, it's a stage 1 Pokemon. But it also has Free Retreat, and Free Retreat used to be much more relevant than it is now. Having Free Retreat before we had things like Cyrus was super important, because basically in a lot of decks you could, use your Starmie, you could kind of attack, take a hit, and then just retreat out for free, and you wouldn't have to worry about having things like X-Speed or whatnot, and you wouldn't have to discard those energies to retreat. Basically, being able to retreat for free was a big deal in the first couple formats before we had cards like Cyrus that were just going to bring you up into the active spot anyway. So for that reason, I think that Starmie was a lot better before Cyrus came out, and so was Free Retreat. 90 damage isn't that bad, 2-hit KOing basically everything in the game right now, barring a couple Pokemon with giant capes. So I don't think Starmie's terrible. I just don't think I think it's a little bit more underwhelming compared to things like maybe Articuno, Gyarados, and Palkia. So I think Starmie is actually going to go into the B tier. Pretty average all around. What you'll notice here is a lot of the B tier cards do see some play and they see some success, but they're not really considered like meta, you know what I mean? And I think that they're of course, like new cards can come out in future expansions that make some of these cards good again or better than they are right now. But at least with all of the context that we have right now, just looking at the cards themselves, the B tier is very much sort of that middling road here. And here's the other interesting thing. Zapdos is actually going to go into the B tier. I think that Zapdos has always been kind of an inflated card. I think it's seen a lot of play, especially when Pikachu was seeing a lot of play. There wasn't that many, good basic Electro-type Pokemon in previous formats, so Zapdos saw a lot more play than it maybe should have. I don't think that the card is super good in its own right. Yes, we can hit for Peck for 20 damage. That is hitting for weakness on a lot of Pokemon. Yes, Electro-type is the strongest offensive type in Pokemon Pocket, but the second attack for Zapdos has always been very... I don't know, I've had mixed feelings about it. There's no way to really accelerate energy super properly now in the game, or there never has been for the Electric type. So 3 energies does seem like a lot, especially when oftentimes we're kind of pairing, if we're comparing this to, Magnezone, which can kind of set itself up, hit for 110 for 3 energy. So I don't know, Zapdos really isn't as good of a card as people think it is. Yes, it did win a lot because it was paired with Pikachu for a while. But people now, they're not even playing Zapdos in Pachirisu or in other decks. There's no real way to get those 3 energies on Zapdos super reliably, other than using like a Dawn combo with Magneton. I just don't really think that there's a lot of upside to Zapdos, especially since you could have those 3 energies and do 0 damage, and half the time you're doing 100 damage. So 100 damage for 3 energies really isn't that good. I mean, it's okay, but it's not guaranteed, and it's still not that good overall. We also have 130 HP as opposed to, these other Pokemon with 140 HP like Moltres and Articuno. And the thing with Zapdos, it's an Electric-type Pokemon, but it's weak to Electric, which means that we are literally getting 1-hit KO'd by Magnezone, and that is pretty tough for Zapdos. So I'm not super high on Zapdos. I'm gonna go ahead and put it in the B tier. Next, we have Gengar. Gengar is an interesting one. I actually don't think that Gengar is that bad. Again, 100 damage for 3 energies isn't that great, but the reason you play Gengar is for its ability, very control-based ability. But the thing is with Gengar is that basically in the format now, once it's in the active spot, it stays there. We're not 1-hit KOing basically any Pokemon in the game, but there's a lot of Pokemon that are 2-hit KOing us. So we don't have an advantage in terms of being in the active spot. We're a 2-prize Pokemon that's going to get 2-hit KO'd by basically everything in the game. We are technically weak to Dark, so there are ways to kind of 1-hit KO Gengar if you can whittle it down a little bit. It's also a stage 2 Pokemon, and Ghastly and Haunter aren't necessarily super strong cards in their own right. Psychic type in general just feels a little bit lackluster. However, we do have access to things like Gardevoir, which is also another stage 2 Pokemon, so you don't typically see it played with Gengar. We do have Mythical Slab. There's a couple cards that you can play with Gengar. Yes, Mew EX is also a Psychic type Pokemon, but I mean, there's a reason why Gengar just doesn't see that much play. I don't actually think it's a terrible card. I think it's very comparable to something like a Blastoise EX, where it certainly can win games. It just isn't like... It doesn't have what it needs to be considered, relevant in the metagame to any degree. I mean, yes, if we had a way to maybe evolve into Gengar super consistently, or to accelerate maybe some energies onto it a little bit quicker, like, I don't know. If this attack was even like 80 damage for 2 energies, it would be totally different. Or if somehow Gengar wasn't a stage 2 Pokemon, if it was a stage 1 Pokemon, similarly to Aerodactyl, I think this effect would be really, really strong. But basically, control cards like this that aren't able to even go into play until later in the game by turn 4 to turn 5 on average just aren't that good, because our opponent really is kind of collecting and using all the cards that they need to before we even get Gengar into play. So it's a little bit more of an RNG card. Again, similarly to Blastoise, I don't think it's bad. It's stage 2 Pokemon are just tough to use because they're just so slow, and Pokemon Pocket games are so quick. So Gengar really has to go into the C tier. That's just my opinion. And next up, we have Mewtwo EX. So Mewtwo is a really interesting one. I was actually debating where I wanted to rank Mewtwo EX because it went from being kind of the best deck in the game. Psychic type was super, super good. Mythical Island was insane. We had Mythical Slab, we had Mew EX, we have Gardevoir still to power up Mewtwo. Really the kind of the card that's meant to go with Mewtwo. It's very similar to like Charizard and Moltres, except it's just a little bit different. I think the problem with Mewtwo is that this format was very much not kind to Mewtwo, in the sense that we used to be able to just have, one Mewtwo in the active spot, and then maybe start committing energies to it. It's just going to sit there, soak up damage, and then, we would have maybe a second Mewtwo on our bench. We could kind of also start attaching the energies to, and we could just eventually retreat out of the active spot with that other Mewtwo EX. But now it just doesn't really work like that, because Cyrus exists. A lot of Pokemon with Giant Cape are above the 150 HP threshold, so there's a lot of Pokemon in the game that we're actually not 1-hit KOing. Things like Gyarados, like Charizard, Palkia with Giant Cape. A lot of Pokemon are just above that HP threshold that we're not able to 1-hit KO anymore. That is a really, really big deal. Exeggutor is also dominating the format right now with Celebi EX. 150 HP on Mewtwo just isn't that relevant. It's not a fast card. So I actually do kind of feel bad about Mewtwo, but I think it is also really a C tier card. I think it's just really fallen out of favor. The way that the format and the way that Pokemon Pocket is shaped up, at least right now with all of the cards that we've gotten from Space Time Smackdown, isn't really kind to late game cards, at least late game cards that aren't able to very consistently take KOs, and I think Mewtwo really falls into that category. It is not a fast card, it's more of a late game card, even though it's a basic EX Pokemon, and it is not getting one-hit KOs on a lot of Pokemon in the format right now. So unfortunately, I think Mewtwo has gotten power crept a little bit, and it's just sort of in a tier that doesn't really make a lot of sense in the current landscape of Pokemon Pocket, so it's going to go into the C tier. And next we have Machamp. Machamp's also going into the C tier. I don't have a lot to say about it. The only upside to Machamp EX is that we can attack on curve, a term that I use basically to say that we can attack with Machop and then go into Machoke and then go into Machamp. Or, yeah, I believe those are the evolution lines because they have 1 energy in their attack cost, then 2, and then 3. So, technically speaking, yes, like we can always get an attack off, especially going second. I don't think the Machamp is actually that bad of a card. Unfortunately for Pokemon Pocket, like you're not always going second, sometimes you're going first, and not being able to attack with Machamp until turn 4 is really quite bad. There's not that many other great lead-off fighting type Pokemon that we could pair with Machamp. It's also a stage 2 Pokemon, and the upside to it is just really not that high. We're doing, I think, 120 or 130 damage, just not enough to one-hit KO mostly any Pokemon in the game right now, especially with Giant Cape. So if we're investing 3 energies and all of the time to evolve into Machamp EX, we would like to at least one-hit KO Pokemon, which it's just not doing, and I think that's really kind of a struggle. It can be decent, again, against some other aggro or tempo-based attackers, but it's just not it. I mean, it falls under the same trap that a lot of the other Stage 2 EX Pokemon fall under. The game's just not very kind to them. You really need a lot of support or a lot of damage output. Charizard's really one of the only Pokemon that really fits that bill right now. So Machamp has to go into the C tier. Marrowak EX is really, really interesting. It hasn't seen any play this format. I think mainly because it's weak to grass. Like, it is a decent card. It really isn't that bad of a card, but you gotta compare it to the #1, EX Pokemon of this current format, which is Exeggutor EX, and it really, really does not like Exeggutor EX. Basically, technically, yes, for 2 energies, we can do 160 damage. That's enough to KO Exeggutor EX, but we have a 25% chance of doing that whenever we attack. It's a very low percentage chance, but we're also a stage 1 Pokemon that attacks for 2 energies. Exeggutor is a stage 1 Pokemon that attacks for 1 energy. So basically, in that matchup, you're kind of going an entire turn where you're not able to basically attack because if you're going first, yes, you can evolve first, but you only have 1 energy, so you have to wait a whole other turn to attack. Exeggutor, if they are going first or second, can still attack for that 1 energy, so it's a lot more relevant for Exeggutor EX. And I think that stage 1 Pokemon with 2 energies in their attack cost are always going to be a little bit awkward, and they're just not going to be as viable as they maybe should, unless, again, we have some way to accelerate energies to them. Marrowak, we just don't have a way to do that. I think that if we're talking about stage 1 fighting type Pokemon, we really have to look at Aerodactyl EX as really the only fill-in. Aerodactyl really did kind of just take over Marrowak. It's very, very similar. It's got the same amount of HP. It does, on average, Marrowak does 80 damage, but Aerodactyl just does 80 damage no matter what. We also have the effect, so I think Marrowak really fell out of favor. I almost kind of want to put it in the D tier because it's like there's really never a reason to play Marrowak, but I don't feel that strongly about it, so I am going to put Marrowak into the C tier. I think it's just not good. I don't know if we'll even put any. We'll put a couple cards probably here into the D tier. It's just hard to put EX Pokemon into the D tier. If I was going to put EX Pokemon in the D tier, I think Marrowak would maybe fall in there. But I still think that Marrowak's not. I don't know. I probably am going to put it in the D tier because, again, it's like it really does struggle. Like, at least Aerodactyl's not weak to grass, right? And that's something that you got to keep in mind. So technically, we could live 2 attacks from an Exeggutor, but it's also providing value on the bench. Marrowak is just not good. It really isn't good at all. And I think I am going to put it in the D tier. I don't expect Marrowak to really see any play ever. It's a complete RNG based card. Technically, you can, evolve it, put 2 energies onto it, and do 0 damage, and that's absolutely terrible. So sorry, Marrowak, I have to put you in the D tier. I think as far as all the other EX Pokemon go, it might be one of the worst, if not the worst. So in retrospect, yeah, I think Marrowak has to go into the D tier, and I do apologize for all of the people that love Marrowak EX. But Aerodactyl is an interesting one. I'm kind of thinking either A or B tier for Aerodactyl. I think that this format, it hasn't seen that much play. if we're being honest with you. I think Magnezone really does kind of scare Aerodactyl a little bit. For some reason, we're fighting Pokemon weak to Electric, which does feel pretty bad, especially in this format. But the Primeval ability is very underrated. There's a lot of Pokemon that like to evolve in the active spot. Exeggutor is one of them. There's more, I guess. I don't know exactly. I can't name them off the top of my head, but there definitely are Pokemon that love to evolve into the active spot. Maybe not super commonly in the format right now, but you know, Exeggutor is definitely a big one, and I think it can really make that matchup or make that interaction a little bit more interesting for Aerodactyl. 80 damage isn't that bad. We can get boosted by Lucario, so we have some extra damage modifications. We should be able to 2-hit KO really anything in the format with Aerodactyl. I kind of want to put it in the A tier. I think there's an upside and a downside to Aerodactyl, and that's the fact that it's a fossil Pokemon. We don't have any fossil support cards in the sense that, you know, allowing us to draw into our fossils or find our fossils from our deck. So it's really sort of this interesting sort of contrast where when you're playing fossils in your deck, they don't count as basic Pokemon, which means technically speaking, if we wanted to pair, you know, Hitmonlee or Hitmonchan with Aerodactyl, we're always going to start with it, right? Because Aerodactyl, it doesn't have any basic Pokemon. It just has the fossils, which don't count as basic Pokemon in the deck. That's also a downside to some degree because fossils can't be found with Pokeball, so you got to keep that in mind as well. It really is sort of, it's got its ups and its downs, but overall, I think Aerodactyl's a good card. It's really like top of B tier, like low A tier in my mind. I think Aerodactyl could be extremely relevant. Its effect could be really relevant, and again, we still have Lucario, and it's not a bad card. I think I am just going to put it in the B tier, though. I don't know. I do kind of want to put it in the A tier, though. I really do. We're coming up on a lot of really strong cards. So I am actually going to put Aerodactyl in the A tier because I think that even in this format, things aren't super kind to Aerodactyl. I do think that it's actually an A tier card in terms of its overall quality and how good the card is like in a vacuum. So yeah, I feel pretty good about putting Aerodactyl in the A tier. Next, we have Wigglytuff, and Wigglytuff is really interesting to me. I don't think Wigglytuff is a good card because I like to compare it to Mismagius. So they're both very, very similar. In fact, almost the same. Mismagius does, 70 damage for 2 energies, and it puts, basically a very, very similar, if not basically the same status condition on your opponent's Pokemon with Confusion, and then Wigglytuff does Sleep. The thing with Wigglytuff is it does 1 more damage. That's 80 damage. That's a little bit of a relevant number, able to 2-hit KO Pokemon, but Mismagius does it for 2 energies, so it's kind of tough. And basically, why are we playing Wigglytuff EX? So you got to ask yourself that question. I think they tried to balance this card since it's kind of the original. I think, yeah, it's the first ever, colorless EX Pokemon. So they had to balance it to some degree because being a colorless Pokemon means you can pair it with anything else in the game. They did buff colorless Pokemon a little bit with Dialga EX, and I think Manaphy as well. Does Manaphy work for... No, I think Manaphy might be only water Pokemon, but Dialga does allow you to accelerate energies to any kind of Pokemon. So yes, technically we can accelerate those energies to Wigglytuff. Yes, I have seen Dialga and Wigglytuff do fairly well. It used to be a good partner with Exeggutor because before we had Celebi EX, it was really the only good partner to pair with Exeggutor, but now we have, Celebi, so I think Wigglytuff really has fallen out of favor. I think it's better than Marrowak, if I'm being honest with you, because the damage is guaranteed, and yes, we have the 50-50 chance to put our opponent to sleep, or... We have a 100% chance to put our opponent to sleep, but there's a 50-50 chance that they stay asleep on their turn. So that 50-50 odds is actually a lot better than people think it is. I think people kind of lean away from RNG-based cards from a competitive standpoint, but honestly, it's really not that bad. 80 damage and a 50% chance to turn off your opponent next turn is actually quite strong. Even the 3 energies on a stage 1 Pokemon, 140 HP as well, does seem really low for Wigglytuff. I always thought it should have more HP, especially when you consider Exeggutor has 160. Wigglytuff always a really, high HP kind of tanky Pokemon in the games. Weird that it has 140 HP, but again, I think that they overbalanced Wigglytuff. They really undertuned it a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and put it in the C tier. That's my opinion. And next we have Mismagius, which I am actually going to put in the B tier. I've been very, very surprised. In a format where Darkrai and Dark-type cards are extremely relevant, Mismagius actually has a lot of pretty consistent placements in the format, and I actually do like Mismagius as a card. Again, very similar to Wigglytuff. It's a little bit less damage, but same amount of HP. Retreat cost is 1 less, but the attack is 1 less energy, and that is actually really, really relevant when you think about it. I think that the format right now doesn't have a really significant place for Mismagius, but overall, I think it really is just Wigglytuff, but just better in most case scenarios. So I am going to put Mismagius in the B tier. It hasn't been around that long. It came out in Space Time Smackdown, so it might be a little bit tougher for us to rank those Space Time Smackdown cards, but I do think that it's actually a pretty solid EX Pokemon, so I feel comfortably putting it in the B tier. You can pair it in a lot of different ways. Mew EX, Sigilyph, or Magnezone. There's a lot of actually ways that people have played Mismagius, and I think that it's actually the best Psychic type card right now, mainly because it's the fastest, or I guess the most aggressive Psychic card in the game right now. So it's going to go into the B tier. Next up, we have Gyarados EX, and here's the thing with Gyarados. Gyarados is a S tier card. You cannot tell me otherwise. This is a stage 1 Pokemon with 180 HP that for 4 energies does 140 damage. That's crazy. First of all, that is crazy. You got to understand that the only reason Gyarados isn't a top tier card, or it is actually a top tier card, but the only reason why Gyarados is somewhat balanced is because you have to play Magikarp to evolve into Gyarados. I'm not even going to factor that into it because I'm just looking at Gyarados EX as a card. Yes, technically Hitmonlee is popular. A big reason why bench damage at Hitmonlee was relevant overall was because of Magikarp's 30 HP and the fact that Gyarados, that was really the only way to counter Gyarados. Once this thing's set up, there's really not much you can do with Misties, with Manaphy, with Vaporeon. It's so easy to get this card set up. You can pair it with Druddigon, you can pair it with Greninja to fix that 140 damage, which is just a little bit lackluster, especially in an Exeggutor format. We would like to be doing 160. That's sort of how you want to KO Pokemon. Greninja and Druddigon really do fix that for Gyarados. It's got so much support. I think that Water EX cards are just really good in their own right. Gyarados is incredible. This is honestly one of the strongest EX Pokemon in the game. 180 HP on a stage 1 Pokemon is crazy, no matter how you slice it. Yes, the retreat cost is bad, but again, that doesn't really matter right now with Cyrus in the game. Misty's, again, able to set this thing up really, really quickly. We have Pokemon Communications to find it easier. I really, really think Gyarados is a top tier card. Even with all the Magnezones running around and the format being pretty aggressive, I still think that Gyarados is an S tier card. That's my opinion. And next we have Celebi, and Celebi's really interesting. I kind of wanted to put Celebi in the S tier as well, but again, the reason why Celebi can't be S tier is because it doesn't always do what it needs to do. Unfortunately, it is an RNG based card. You can kind of just cheat the math a little bit by playing Jungle Totem and flipping 20 coins to inevitably, really increase your odds dramatically to, do enough damage to take KOs. I think in the format right now, it pairs extremely well with Exeggutor. I think that's a big reason why Celebi is so successful, but I think one of the underrated aspects of Celebi is, again, the ability to play this as an more aggressive or / tempo-based card, where we actually just lead with it, and by our second or maybe third turn, if we're going first, we can just start attacking with Powerful Bloom. And it really does scale, right? With Giant Cape to go up to 150 HP, with Potion, with Erika's, we can keep Celebi alive for quite some time. So in a scenario where we are playing like a Celebi Exeggutor deck, sometimes it's actually better to lead with Celebi than it is with Exeggutor. I think that's a very underrated aspect of Celebi EX. Even without Jungle Totem, technically we can play Superior and get that Jungle Totem effect, flip a million coins, one-hit KO anything in the game. But again, I think the card, low HP, it is weak to fire, so we got to keep that in mind as well. A lot of Pokemon are one-hit KOing Celebi. It's not the best late game card, but it's also not the best early game card. It really does kind of get carried by Exeggutor. So for that reason, and because of all of the RNG and the coin flips, Celebi has to go into the A tier. I do not think it's a bad card. I think that it does actually have more of a case to go into the S tier than it does into the B tier, but for that reason, I am still going to put it into the A tier. I got to be a little bit selective with where I'm going to put my S tier Pokemon, but Celebi EX, still a very, very good card. It's going to go into the A tier. And next up, we have Mew EX. And yes, so even though Mew EX hasn't seen that much play of this format, Mew EX is still an S tier card. You can't tell me otherwise. This thing is future-proof. The genome hacking for 3 colorless energies, by the way. Colorless energies. You can fit Mew EX in any deck. It's the most versatile EX Pokemon in the game. You can copy any attack on any opponent's Pokemon. It basically auto-wins you a lot of matchups right now. Basically, it will for the future. I just think that Mew EX is a really, really versatile card. One of just the best cards in the game right now. Even though in the format, it doesn't necessarily make that much sense. Mew EX will always see some play, and it's always going to be relevant to some degree. Depending on the metagame and how the metagame forms, it's going to be better or worse. That's always going to be the case for all of these cards. But in a vacuum, talking about the cards themselves, I think Mew EX as a basic Pokemon with genome hacking is super, super good. We also have Budding Expeditioner, which we can kind of scoop it up from the active spot. We have Dialga and other ways to accelerate energies to Mew EX, so I really do like Mew EX, and I think it has to go in the S tier in my opinion. It's just that good. Just such an incredible, incredible card. Okay, next we have Pidgeot EX, and this is another interesting one. Again, apologies to Pidgeot, but it's gonna fall right into the C tier. Not only with Wigglytuff, but all of these other Stage 2 EX Pokemon that really don't do enough to justify playing them. I know a lot of people like Pidgeot EX. It's got 170 HP, which is technically less than the other Stage 2 Pokemon for whatever the reason. It has a retreat cost of 1, which can be relevant, but the problem with Pidgeot EX is that it's not a one-hit KO card, right? We're doing a decent amount of damage, but we're not doing enough to one-hit KO reliably most or all of the Pokemon in the format. So again, being a Stage 2 Pokemon, it doesn't have enough upside to kind of counteract the drawbacks of having to play a Stage 2 Pokemon. Yes, it's a colorless Pokemon, so we can play it in a variety of different ways, but you're taking up, you know, at least probably 6 spots in your deck to play this Pokemon when there's just a lot of other better options in the game as far as EX Pokemon go. I just can't justify putting it in the B tier. I know it saw some fringe success last format, but that's just because it was new and people were choosing to play it. So for that reason, Pidgeot EX to me has to go into the C tier. It really just isn't as good as I think a lot of people wanted it to be. Yes, we have Pokemon Flute, which does work with it. It's just not that good. There are scenarios, like there could be a world where Pidgeot is relevant and it is a good card, because it does fulfill a certain niche in the format. I just don't think that it's as good as the other cards above it. That's just my opinion. I've never been high on Pidgeot, but I don't know. I don't know what to really think about it. But I do like Pidgeot EX as a card. I just don't think that it deserves to be in the B tier or the A tier, in my personal opinion. Not even looking at results, just looking at how good the card is and how good it will be in the future. Okay, we got to move a little bit quicker because we're at 35 minutes into the video. That's actually crazy here. I've been talking for that long. Okay, so we have Yanmega EX. I like Yanmega, but I cannot put it in the A tier. It's just a really good ancillary piece. It really is a very consistent grass-type attacker. 3 energy, stage 1 Pokemon, does 130. And when you take a look at this card at face value, it really isn't that good. It's good in this format, mainly because we have Weavile, we have Darkrai. It can go and pair with Dialga EX to make a pretty consistent and a pretty decent, like, A high B tier deck list, basically, because we're able to one-hit KO those Dark-type Pokemon. It really was put in the game to help counteract, you know, Darkrai and Weavile, because they knew that they would be probably pretty relevant cards. So it's good to have something like a Yanmega EX, which is splashable. You can throw it in a lot of different decks. It has a very specific niche, but like when you're taking this card at face value, it really isn't that good. If this card had free retreat, I maybe would think about putting it in the A tier. Again, it seems some success, but I don't think it's as good as some of the other grass-type cards that we have on the tier list. So I think Yanmega EX has to go into the B tier. That's my opinion. Maybe next format, there's a way to play Yanmega EX that's very, very good. But overall, I don't necessarily love Yanmega EX. I think that it's a totally okay card, and I think it falls into the B tier very, very appropriately. And next, we have Infernape, and yes, Infernape is going into the C tier. Again, it falls under the same trap that all of these other Stage 2 Pokemon do, where for some reason, the developers of Pokemon Pocket don't seem to understand how, from a competitive standpoint, Stage 2 Pokemon really function. They take way too long, unless there's some support that comes to the game that allows us to evolve our Stage 2 Pokemon much quicker. There just isn't I guess, enough upside to play cards that are that slow and that don't have that high of an upside. Yes, in the format, Infernape is actually not that bad because of all of the grass-type decks and being able to one-hit KO Exeggutor EX, hitting for weakness. That's really the only reason we would ever play Infernape. You discard all the energies. There are Dawn combos, but it's just not nearly as good of a card in a vacuum as the other Fire-type cards. It's really kind of the in-between of Charizard and Arcanine. If this card, again, if this was just a Stage 1 Pokemon, it would be so much better. But unfortunately, it's a Stage 2 Pokemon. It takes a while to set up, or it takes a while to evolve it, even with Pokemon Communications, which did help kind of balance these evolution Pokemon in the format. But for the most part, Pokemon Communications, it still doesn't really help Stage 2 Pokemon that much. It really is more so helping Stage 1 Pokemon in the game right now. But Infernape, it is just a little bit lackluster. I know some people aren't going to like it, but again, why would we play Infernape EX and do 140 damage when we're not even one-hit KOing most Pokemon in the format, especially with Giant Cape running around, especially being a Stage 2 Pokemon, and especially, not, I guess, or discarding all those energies after we attack. So, I don't know. It'd be different if it just discarded 2 energies like Charizard did. It would be much, much better, I think, in my opinion, because we could attack turn after turn a little bit more reliably. Yes, we have free retreat, but that doesn't really help Infernape in how it plans to be used and how it would like to be used. I think, again, if we could attack for Infernape turn after turn, it would be totally different, but we're only doing 1 more damage than Arcanine EX, and we're a Stage 2 Pokemon, so you got to keep that in mind. Yes, we have free retreat, but free retreat really doesn't matter at all in the scenario of Infernape EX. Free retreat's really only good for like basic or maybe Stage 1 Pokemon, because basically, like, if Infernape is in the active spot and then it takes an attack, if we get a KO, that's cool, but like, again, we could take a hit and then, yeah, sure, we can retreat out for free, but like, Cyrus exists, so that free retreat really doesn't help Infernape really in any degree. Even in a format right now with Exeggutor running around, where it does seem to be a good counter to Exeggutor, it doesn't have a very good win rate because, again, it just struggles against all of the other, Pokemon and decks in the format. So, unfortunately, Infernape has to go into the C tier, similarly, again, to things like Gengar, Machamp, and Pidgeot. So, I feel bad. I do feel bad. I wish Infernape was better, but they just, for some reason, undertuned this card to some degree. I don't know why. Next, we have Palkia EX, and I honestly kind of want to put Palkia into the S tier as well. I don't know exactly. It's tough for me. Like is Palkia also an S tier card? The thing with Palkia is that we're doing 140 for 4 energies, very similar to Mewtwo EX, but think about all of the additional support that we have, right? We have Misty's, we even have Cyrus, which again goes well with its attack that also does 20 damage, not 10, but 20 damage to all of our opponents' bench Pokemon. 150 is a really good number, so I like Palkia. It's been relevant since the card came out. I think that Water type in general is struggling a little bit in comparison with all of the Magnezone running around, and all of the Darkrai Magnezone, and Exeggutor just having more than 150 HP. It does make things a little bit more awkward, for sure, for Palkia. So I think, I don't know, it's tough to rate it. Like, it's either A tier or S tier. I think S tier would be a very bold assumption, because again, I'm ranking the cards and not necessarily the decks, right? So I got to keep that in mind. I think if, I think in a different world, maybe Palkia could possibly be S tier, but displaying at least in the format right now and in this current metagame how it's done, which it has done very good, if we're being honest with you. It's one of the most popular decks and has one of the best win rates. I still don't really think that Palkia is at the S tier level. Like, it's not like super broken. I mean, yes, like we have Misty's, we have Vaporeon, we have Manaphy. There's like the Palkia archetype is really, really good, but I have a hard time putting Palkia as a card, like as a single card, into the S tier. Whereas like Gyarados and Mew EX are just inherently ridiculously strong for certain reasons. I think that Palkia is very, very good, but I just can't put it in the S tier, and that's my feeling personally. Palkia, in my mind, has to go into the A tier, and I'm going to leave it like that. I'm going to leave Palkia in the A tier. Some of you might agree, some of you might disagree. I'm sure people will disagree a lot with this tier list in general, so comment below. But let's get moving here. I want to wrap up this video in the next 5 to 10 minutes. So we have Pachirisu EX. Pachirisu EX is actually going to go into the A tier. I think, again, it really has taken over the place of Pikachu EX. Yes, we're doing 80 damage and not 90 damage, but that doesn't really matter. We're still 2-hit KOing basically everything in the format, and if we're not, we still have Giovanni to help us since we're probably playing 18 trainers anyway. The tool cards are very meta-defining cards anyway, so they're seeing play in basically every deck. So why not just play a card that, relies on the tool cards anyway? Probably the best pure tempo deck in the game, aside from maybe something like Exeggutor. I really do like Pachirisu. Yes, it doesn't have that much HP, but that really doesn't matter right now in the format. So I think Pachirisu really has sort of taken that Pikachu slot. I think at least how the game is right now, having basically a guaranteed way to start with Pachirisu, and basically a guaranteed way to do that 80 damage by our second turn, much more consistently at least than Pikachu EX. It probably has to go into the A tier, and like I said, I think that the way that the game has shaped up, at least in this format, Pachirisu not relying on having a bunch of other Electric-type Pokemon on your bench does make it a lot better than Pikachu EX in terms of its overall consistency. So I have to put Pachirisu EX in the A tier. I don't think it's an S tier card, but I do think that it's an A tier card. Next up is Gallade EX, and I could fall under the trap of putting this into the C tier like all of the other Stage 2 Pokemon, but here's the thing. Basically, we don't know. Like, Gallade's actual potential is dependent on what cards we're kind of going up against in the format. There's a lot of Pokemon in the format that take a lot of energy to attack, but they discard those energies after they attack, which really does make Gallade feel a lot less good than it otherwise would. Basically, you're never going up against a Pokemon that has more than 2, sometimes 3 energies in its attack cost, and most of the time, Gallade isn't getting that KO when it really would. Very similar to Infernape. It's just tough. It's tough for Gallade. Yes, we can boost our damage with Lucario, but I don't think that's enough of a reason for me to put it out of C tier. Like I said, it's going C tier for the same reasons that Blastoise, Gengar, Machamp, and Infernape do. It's not a bad card. It just isn't fast enough, and it doesn't have a high enough upside. Again, for whatever the reason, the Pokemon Pocket developers really are not over-tuning Stage 2 Pokemon. And maybe that's okay. Maybe that's for, a good reason, but I think Gallade still kind of falls short for the same reasons that all of the other Stage 2 EX Pokemon do. And that's a bit unfortunate, so we're going to go ahead and put it in the C tier. And that's just how I feel about Gallade. I do like Gallade. It's got some good placements since it came out in Space Time Smackdown, but I really don't think it's, that good of a card. And next we have Weavile and Darkrai. So we're going to do Darkrai first because I think it's easy to understand that Darkrai is an S tier card for a variety of different reasons. It's super flexible. I think its ability is probably one of the strongest abilities out of any Pokemon in the entire game. Basically, playing Darkrai EX in basically any deck that pairs with Pokemon that doesn't have a lot of energy in their attack cost, or things like Magnezone, which don't require you to attach energies to them ever, allows Darkrai EX to just sort of not only set itself up very consistently and be a very consistent, mid-game attacker, but also do incredible chip damage. Basically, by the time Darkrai gets set up, you've done 60 damage, but there's no reason why you can't just keep attaching to Darkrai over the span of a Pokemon Pocket game that's maybe 4, 5, 6, 7 turns. We're doing a lot of extra damage with Darkrai EX over the course of that game. It's just got infinite value. It's just a really good card, and it's very flexible, basically. Now, we are kind of the only downside to Darkrai is that we're locked into playing exclusively Dark-type energies when we're playing Darkrai decks, and like I said, there are very few partners that pair extremely well with Darkrai, but it does go really well with Dawn combos, as we've seen with Weavile EX. People play it with Magnezone. They play it with Greninja, Druddigon. There's a lot of ways that we can kind of play Darkrai in the deck. It does seem like it would be a little bit limiting to only have to play Dark energies and to basically have to attach to Darkrai every turn, but there's a lot of cards in the game that just do value without needing energy to attach to them, right? That provide value, things like Druddigon, things like Greninja, like Magnezone. And for that reason, I think that Darkrai is really relevant because in its own right, it's just such a strong card. So basically, that's how we have to look at it. All of these other Pokemon, like by contrast, like by turn 3, Blizzard, like Articuno would have been able to attack once for Blizzard, or maybe once for Ice Wing. So that's 40 damage plus a Blizzard attack, that's 80. That's 120 damage plus the bench damage that you would attack from Blizzard. Whereas Darkrai EX, is doing 20 damage on turn 1, 20 damage on turn 2, 20 damage on turn 3, while also attacking for 80 damage. So that's 60 plus 80. That's 140 by turn 3. Again, pacing matters a lot in Pokemon Pocket, but also, just overall damage output. Being able to do 100 of damage in one turn with Darkrai is pretty significant. So I have to put it in the S tier, not just because it's dominated this format, just because it's actually a really good card, and I think it'll be relevant for a very long time. You got to understand that even with it being weak to grass, which again, spoiler, the best EX Pokemon in the game right now is grass type, it's still extremely relevant and still one of the better cards in the entire game. So Darkrai has to go into the S tier, that's my opinion. Next up, let's do Weavile. I think Weavile goes into the A tier for a lot of similar reasons that, a lot of the other A tier Pokemon go in here, right? It's got a 1 energy attack cost. It's a stage 1 Pokemon. That's a very good, sweet spot, basically. Now, the only downside to Weavile is that it does kind of require you to either go second and then attack with Sneasel beforehand to do some damage, or to have, a Dawn combo with Darkrai EX to get damage on before we're able to attack, right? So the thing is, Weavile EX is really more of an ancillary piece to Darkrai EX and a Darkrai archetype, but it's still a really good card, even though its attack is conditional, and it does 70 damage, which is pretty relevant. Basically, being able to attack for 1 energy on a stage 1 Pokemon makes this card good. I wish we had more Pokemon like this. Like if Mismagius had 1 energy in its attack cost but just did less damage, this card would just be better. So really any stage 1 Pokemon with 1 energy in its attack cost is super relevant because it's good both going first and going second, and that's a very important aspect in the game of Pokemon Pocket, which again, pacing is extremely important. So Weavile, in my mind, has to go into the A tier, even though it hasn't seen that much play. It's not like the best partner to Darkrai because again, everything is weak to grass and Exeggutor exists. So I know in the current format, Weavile isn't necessarily the most viable deck or the best partner rather for Darkrai. It's still a really good card, and I think it'll be relevant, for time to come. It's just a really good aggro card, good pace, good damage, good synergy with Darkrai. I think it's just a really good card. And then next up, I guess we'll do Exeggutor. Okay, We'll rank Exeggutor here just so we can kind of get it out of the way. If I had to put my own tier for Exeggutor, I could, but Exeggutor is S tier. In my mind, this is by far the best EX Pokemon in the entire game. You got to look at it to this effect, right? There's no other EX Pokemon in the game that does what Exeggutor does. Okay, it's got 160 HP. It has access to Erika's. It can attack. It's both good going second and first. There's no real downside to it, similar to like how Gyarados has Magikarp, which only has 30 HP. Exeggutor has 50 HP, and there's really not that many Pokemon that can KO Exeggutor and do 50 damage on their first turn. Skarmory is really the only example of that, but we also have Erika's to just heal up on the next turn. We have Potion. We have Celebi as well, which is just a really good partner Pokemon to Exeggutor. So really in the format right now with Cyrus, kind of being really the meta-defining card of this format. Pokemon that are able to stay in the active spot for as long as possible without having to retreat, while also just providing a lot of damage and a lot of value, are really a hot commodity in the format right now, but really in Pokemon Pocket overall, and I think going into the future. Again, I think Exeggutor does this better than just everything else. There's nothing that Exeggutor does bad. It's not even that bad if you were to just, it's a little bit of an RNG card, I'll be honest, but if you even flip Tails exclusively with Exeggutor, it's still not a bad card. You know, like 40 damage with 160 HP for 1 energy, like, isn't bad. Like, it really isn't. Like, especially if you consider that you're healing for so much with Erica's, and it's just a really, really good card. I don't know what else I could say about Exeggutor. It's just overtuned. It's just a super overtuned card, especially when you look at, like, other Pokemon. Like, Weavile was released in Spacetime Smackdown, which was, like, you know, months after Exeggutor came out, and it's a Stage 1 Pokemon with 140 HP, so that's 20 less HP than Exeggutor, and its attack does 70 damage, but it's conditional. It really does 30 damage and 40 more if your opponent has damage onto it. Exeggutor can just hit for 80 damage on turn 1. Yes, it's a coin flip, but just crazy. This card is crazy. I don't know what else I can really say about it. It really is kind of the perfect EX Pokemon for a variety of different ways. Next up, let's just do Dialga EX. So this is the only Steel-type Pokemon in Pokemon Pocket right now. Unfortunately, there wasn't enough good Pokemon to pair with Dialga upon release. I do think that will change. So, I mean, Dialga could easily be an S-tier card, just based off the fact that it's an enabler card. It's similar to Moltres, but the cool thing about Dialga is that it's not locked to fire Pokemon. We can attach those metal energies to any Pokemon, any type of Pokemon, as long as, of course, they can use those metal energies. So it's very flexible. It's a little bit slower than Moltres. I wasn't really high on Dialga because, again, I think that the way that the format's shaping up, that slower cards like this aren't necessarily that good. But I made the comparison before. Imagine if we had a Blastoise EX that was a Steel-type Pokemon. Things would be completely different. The format would be totally different, and it would make Dialga that much better. So I think Dialga is an A-tier card. I think it's a very, very good card. It has S-tier potential, but unfortunately, actually, you know what? No, I am putting Dialga in the S-tier. I am. Some people might not agree with this. Some people do agree with this. Not based off how good the card is performing right now in the metagame, but just like the inherent value of the card. Like 30 damage plus 2 energies is extremely good. There just isn't a lot of Pokemon that they've put into the game right now, at least, that's able to capitalize on this effect of Dialga. In fact, like literally the best partner for Dialga is Yanmega EX or Mew EX, which are really just tech cards. They're not even like actual like archetype defining cards. So that's really interesting to me. Do we put it in the A tier though? Or do we put it in the S tier? Would it be weird if we put Dialga in the S tier right now? Would that be a really hot take? I don't know if people would agree or disagree with that. I've said that Palkia was better than Dialga from day one, but like inherently speaking, I think Dialga is also just a really, really good card. I'm gonna put it in the A tier. I'm not gonna be that spicy right now. I'm gonna put Dialga in the A tier. I don't want to go super crazy with this tier list. I think it's a very, very good card, but I'm not gonna like over or underrate it to any degree. And then next up we have Lickilicky, and yeah, it's gonna go into the C tier, maybe even the D tier. I thought Lickilicky was gonna be a lot better than it was. Unfortunately for Lickilicky, 4 energies is quite a steep attack cost, especially for only having 160 HP as a stage 1 Pokemon, not a stage 2. You got to keep that in mind. So I guess that 160 is actually quite a bit. It's on par with things like Exeggutor. But the fact is that the damage isn't guaranteed with Lickilicky. So that's why it's got to go into the D tier. It's very RNG based, similar to Marrowak. Like, you got to understand, like, yes, imagine the scenario where we do get our Lickilicky set up, we get 4 energies onto it, we bring it into the active spot, and we're super excited. All we have to do is hit for like 111 damage or 120 damage to take a KO to win the game, and then you flip Tails, and you do 100 damage for 4 energies. It just feels bad. Lickilicky, I just think is too inconsistent. Again, I think it's a colorless Pokemon that they've just undertuned for whatever the reason. It could have been really good. It could have been really good. We do have Dialga, so I don't know what to say about it. I really don't. Yeah, Lickilicky's going in the D tier. I really do. I really do think it's got to go into the D tier. I just think it's bad. I don't think it's a good card. And it's kind of disappointing if we're being honest with you, but it's just the truth. Lickilicky is just not. It's not it. And neither is Marrowak. So apologize to these two guys that have just made their way into the D tier. Maybe it's like a personal vendetta in my mind. I don't know. Yeah, anyway, moving on. Venusaur is actually going into the B tier for a variety of different reasons. I think that Venusaur is actually a good card. I think that basically the only reason Venusaur never really made it into the metagame was because Charizard exists. And unfortunately, Venusaur is a very, very strong card. It really is sort of the anti-aggro or anti-early game deck, where basically if this thing gets set up and you have Ericas and you have potions and you're hitting for 100 and you're healing 190 HP with Giant Cape, that's 210. This thing is just unbeatable in a lot of different scenarios. Unfortunately, in a competitive setting, so many people are still playing Charizard EX to this day, which unfortunately just makes this card that much less popular because it's got one true counter, and that is Charizard. And that's again why things like Charizard are in the A tier, and Venusaur unfortunately has to go down to the B tier. I think it is better as a stage 2 Pokemon, better than all of these other stage 2 Pokemon that are again into the C tier. But yeah, that's just my opinion. Like I said, I think Venusaur is a good card, and it would be very, very relevant, at least somewhat relevant in the metagame, unfortunately, if Charizard didn't exist. So it's going to go ahead and find its way into the B tier. But there it is, guys. Let me zoom out so we can see the full tier list here. This is my EX Pokemon tier list. I know this video was extremely long, and I apologize for that. I did not expect it to be this long, and I do kind of apologize, I'm not gonna lie. But I'm gonna get out of here, guys. Peace out. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Stay tuned. The new expansion comes out in just a couple days. I'm really, really excited for that. And comment below, how you would have ranked these Pokemon differently. Hopefully this was something fun for you guys to, watch and have fun with. But either way, yeah. Anyway, let's get out of here, guys. Have a good one. Peace out. We'll see you guys later. And yeah. Have a good one.